Charles Fillmore is one of those people that I've been carrying around with me for a long time, along with Ernest Holmes and all of our other ancestors in this belief system. And the reason I pulled that up today is because I've been dabbling in a piece of writing around discipline that has been put together by a woman named Deborah Blake. And I read a quote from her the other day, and to me it was really powerful in terms of where I find myself in life. And I was thinking, as I was thinking it through, I began to contrast or raise it up to this idea of what Fillmore is trying to say. So Deborah Blake says, if we want to get the most out of walking a spiritual path, we have to open up to spirit and do this in what might feel like a cynical world. I love that. What feels like a cynical world, where it is hard to believe in concepts that can't be seen. And yet this is what a spiritual path is all about. Giving whatever over to faith. And listening to that still small voice that is real through discipline. This morning on the meditation that opened up today, and for those of you who missed it, you missed a real gem. And it was practitioner and 3/4 Vicki Lopes who led that, because she's almost a minister. She's so close to being a minister. She just is right there. She's right at the door. I want to be the first to call her Reverend. All right. And she made a statement within that meditation about a place within us where all that is known is perfection. All that is known is perfection. And this whole idea of this secret, sacred chamber from within is a real biblical. I think it's like in the book of Matthew or something. I don't know where it's at. But it's this really sweet idea. And she said, this place where perfection exists. And so when I was listening to her, I came up with a question. Is there a place within me that knows me better than I know me consciously? Wow. Is there a place within me that knows me better than I know myself consciously? And if that place exists in consciousness, how does this work? And again, it really opened up a whole nother door to what I wanted to talk about today. And so, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the musician David Crosby, who was with Crosby, Stills and Nash. And on his own, he produced all kinds of albums on his own. And he produced a very strange album. And it said, the name of the album was If I Could Only Remember My Name. And I was looking online this week about looking at all his solo albums, and he had a whole bunch of them, especially towards the end of his life. He turned out a whole bunch of albums with a band called the Lighthouse Band, and these were kids, like 30 years old, and he was he was in his upper 70s, and he's playing with these young people, and he produced like 3, 4, 5 albums with these kids, and they're gorgeous, right? So David Crosby's album, If I Could Only Remember My Name, came out 50 years ago. This is the 50th anniversary of that album this year. And it's an album that he went off and did in a studio after what he said one of the greatest loves of his life had made her transition through an automobile accident. And he said, interestingly enough, in a documentary that came out about him a few years ago, which is called Remember My Name. That's interesting, right? He makes an album, I Forgot My Name. 50 years later, he does a documentary, Remember My Name. I think that's really interesting. Is there a place within us that knows perfection? Okay? And so when this young lady was taken out in a car accident, he disappeared into a recording studio in Marin County. Because as a musician, and David Crosby was not a real pleasant person. I think we all know that, even casually. I mean, his bandmates at Crosby, Stills and Nash, they were done. Young was done. They're all done with him. I mean, over and over and over again. He was a very flawed person, a very colorful person, interesting person, but he could be very caustic. So he disappears all those years ago, 50 years ago, into a studio to just go in with no songs, no ideas, a guitar, and he's joined there by a bunch of other Bay Area musicians at the time, the main one being Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. And Jerry Garcia and David Crosby were really good friends through the music industry, but they also shared some musical passions. One of them was for harmony, and the other one was for jazz. And both these guys were obviously rock and rollers, but they loved jazz. And so this album that they put together was they came into a studio with the two of them and a whole bunch of other people they could round up, picking up in bars or whatever, all the local musicians in the Bay Area who came in and helped them do this. And so 50 years later, or not quite 50 years later, because David Crosby is no longer with us, he talked about this in the documentary. And he said, God loved Jerry Garcia. I love Jerry Garcia. He said, we would go into a studio, and I didn't know what we were doing. And Jerry would say, all those little notes, they're here. They're here. We just have to pull them out. We have to be open to them. Where are you at, all you little notes? And we're going to stand around a microphone, and we're going to play, and we're going to harmonize. A lot of the album, there's no words, there's harmonizing and playing. And so, what was the place within David Crosby that could take the situation that happened and step out away and look back and pull together for him through spirit an experience that allows him to heal? I became acquainted with this really recently, personally. And so as a lot of you know, my wife Judy, she made her transition in May. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I want to talk about an aspect of it that was very personal to me. The last 24 hours, the last week before the last 36 hours that Judy was in the world, she was in the hospital. And this one day I came home and she didn't seem quite right to me, and it frightened me. I didn't know what to do, so I called. She was upset with me about doing this, but I called an ambulance and got them, and they took her to Inlow. And so I went, and they did an assessment of her, and she was in emergency for a long time, and they finally figured out what it was, so they moved her into the hospital. I was there for a long time, and I came home that night, and I walk in the house, and because Andy has a propensity for compulsive behavior, okay, so I want to walk in the house, and no matter what I'm going on, if I'm my bad self, if I'm deflated, if I'm on the dark side, I pick up the remote, I hit the TV, and I go look for something to nosh on, and the TV just becomes noise in the background. And the TV knows what I like for noise, and so it's all ready to go. It's my little addiction companion, right? So I walked in, picked up the remote, click, and nothing's going on. He's like, how dare you? So I walked into the room. I wasn't even in the room with it. Had to walk in there. And so there was a message from Xfinity, and I was, unplug your thing and send a code and give us a call and whatever, something had gone sideways. So I was really irritated, so I did it, and I wasn't getting anywhere, so finally I shut it off and I went to bed, which is a good idea. And so during the next week when she was in the hospital, problems off and on. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. Because I'm being my bad self. I am going to get my compulsion to work because I don't want to be facing anything, right? You know, that's another part of my consciousness, not the perfection one. And so we go through the week, we go through the 36 hours. Judy makes her transition. So I left about 5 o'clock in the morning, the hospital, went home, and decided I was just going to go to bed. I knew I had some appointments that day, obviously, because of what had happened, so I crashed. I slept for about 3 or 4 hours. I woke up, and I'm getting myself together to go, and I find the remote, and nothing. Well, our bill was due about that same time, and it was in her account. It was in her name. The account was in her name, because when we left Paradise, she and I just put our lives back together. You know, oh, I did this, you got that, my name's on this, your name's on that, whatever. We did that. And so her name was on with Xfinity. And so the bill was due. I thought, you know what, I'll go pay the bill. When I'm in there, I'll tell them I got TV problems, you know. So I did. And so they would get on it. Well, basically, between what was going on with it electronically on its own and me paying the bill and all that stuff, then it just died altogether. For 2 weeks, there was no TV. Over that 2-week period of time, I found myself coming home to the empty chamber. Now, David Crosby and Jerry Garcia had guitars and were making music. And so I'm not a musician. And so as I washed dishes, as I did laundry, as I tidied up, as I straightened up, as I cleaned up, I was in silence for 2 weeks in my home. Is there a part of me that knows perfection? Yes. Is there a part of me where that perfection lies that knows also Andy's compulsive consciousness? Yes. Some years ago, there was a book that came out that said, when bad things happen to good people. And it was more of a Judeo-Christian kind of thing, right? But the title, I didn't care really for, I mean, it was well written and everything. I just didn't care for the thesis. But I've always been intrigued by the title. So, but I want to rework it a little bit. Why do challenges come up for people who are nice? I mean, whatever, it doesn't matter. Nice people. Challenges that come up for nice people, good people. And why is that? I work in a business where people who have been around the block a little bit in terms of dealing with issues in their lives and who have gone through some pretty catastrophic events, to a person, once they get healed years later, will say, oh my God, I get it. I know why I went through that. I know why that fell apart. I know why that person left. I know why that job went away. Why? Because there were a whole bunch of things that followed to where I was able to find my footing. That part of me that knows perfection is that foundational part of me in consciousness, the child of spirit. That child of spirit, because I have embraced freedom, which is what we do as human beings. We don't believe in right or wrong here. We don't believe in good and evil. We believe in freedom. You know? Adam and Eve, right? You know, a lot of the world sees what Eve did as bad. We see it as great. Because what she did was, by taking the fruit of the knowledge, was she gave us freedom. Without Eve, we wouldn't have rock and roll. We wouldn't have Picasso. We would not have Da Vinci. We would not have democracy. We wouldn't have we also wouldn't have fascism either, but, you know, it's interesting that we say that today in a sentence. But You see, freedom is where we go into our choices. The part of me that is compulsive behavior lives in the part of me where I took my freedom and I developed compulsive behavior. But there's also a part of me being, who is looking for healing, looking for divine right action, looking for peace, looking for joy, looking for love, looking for going in the right direction. And that part of me pulled the plug on the TV, forcing Andy to come into a place and face what he had to face. So 2 weeks later, finally, Xfinity got so exasperated that they actually did something that cost them money. They sent a technician out to my house, okay? And that technician was bigger than Spirit because that technician was able to get the TV back on. Now this is where the discipline comes in. And this woman, Deborah Blake, her writings are predicated on the idea, this is kind of an old-fashioned idea, the idea of devotion. That word devotion. I think a lot of us, with some of our religious backgrounds, we don't really like that word because we think of, on bended knee, or to worship, or to to prostrate ourselves, open to a god, a deity, whatever. But the actual definition of devotion, in terms of the dictionary, and this is a partial definition because one definition does kind of get into bended knee to the crown or whatever. But the part of devotion I pulled out of the dictionary is, devotion is a loyalty or enthusiasm for an activity or practice. When David Crosby, when his life went sideways, he went to the practice of music to find his place of silence, to find his place of trying to coax out all the little notes. Andy found his practice in a house alone, washing dishes and doing laundry, for all of those revelations to come forward. All the grief, all the understanding, all the love, all the anger, all the sadness, all those stages to come out. And within the interior of my little house, I acted out for 3 weeks all those things and I will continue to act those out. All those stages I went through. And if you could have been a fly on the wall, I was alone, and there were times where I was having arguments with my mother, who's been dead for over 40 years, with Judy, and there were times where I was expressing love for my mom, and love for Judy, and love for my dad, and love for myself. And there were times where I was in despair, and there were times where I was in tear, and there were times where it was funny, and all of that took place within those 4 walls. Because it was a quiet place. M. Scott Peck says, discipline is the means it takes that brings about human spiritual evolution, the appropriate structure for examining a traumatic life. And John Lee, someone who I like a lot in terms of his writing, says, today, alone, in the midst of a life mystery, in the quiet, I take a deep breath. And that breath takes me to the center of my being. It is within this center, this small private chamber, that I share with every expression of spirit that contains truth, love, insight, and passion. There, I allow the healing magic to begin. When he said, I share with the expression of spirit that contains all of these. And I didn't get it until I heard Vicki say this morning, that place of perfection. That place of perfection has a voice at the table. But we have to be quiet. We have to be quiet. We have to come into that place. And the thing that was so powerful to me about this is that the last 36 hours that I spent with Judy in the medical world was so completely overwhelming to me. It swallowed me up. The technology, the medications, the diagnosis, the tests, the explanations, the questions, the code reds, all of that. I sat in a room and was completely overwhelmed. The last thing that I needed, and there was a part of me that knew this, was to embrace some level of noise to try and cancel that out. Because that place of perfection within me knows, Andy, you don't need to cancel it out. You need to live it. You need to understand it. You need to coax those notes out to put together that symphony of healing. So I'm going to end with this, and this is Ernest Holmes. Through spiritual discernment, we understand that we have within us access to a power which is greater than anything that we shall ever use to set us free. I love that. And today, as you leave here today, that is my greatest desire for all of us. We find that chamber and we allow ourselves to be set free. I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you.